Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the global launch of On the Meaning of Sex, thoughts about the new definition of woman. And while my screen says I am Susan Hawthorne, I'm most definitely not. Susan is not able to make it this evening, so I'll be hosting on her behalf. My name is Rachel McDermott and I look after promotions and marketing at the press. I'll do my very best to fill in for Susan's shoes, ably supported by Pauline Hopkins, our editor, who will also do the thank yous for this evening. Now I'm just going to make sure I've got it on speaker view. And as those of you who know or regularly attend our events or watch them on our YouTube channel, you know, we always begin with an acknowledgement of country. So I would like to respectfully acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their custodianship of lands and waterways. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. The countries on which Spinifex staff are located are Jiru, Bunurong, Wiradjuri, Wadawurrung, Eora and Noongar. We also acknowledge the many women throughout history who have fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. So before I begin, please mute yourself if you aren't already muted, as it does help with the recording afterwards. I will also mute so you don't hear my four-legged background office assistant in the background. He's a Jack Russell, it can be a bit noisy. Please use the chat and we'll do our best to answer at the end. We'll leave our questions for the end actually. So we encourage you to use the speaker view for the best Zoom experience, but the choice is totally up to you. Tonight we welcome Kajsa Ekman from Stockholm. Hello, Kajsa.
Hi, how are you? Talking to you from the middle of a snowstorm.
Oh, goodness. Oh, we can't picture that here in Australia.
That's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, so we're delighted to be holding this launch for your book this evening. Our launcher is Bronwyn Winter. And Bronwyn has been a lesbian feminist activist and intellectual for many decades in Australia, France, the UK and transnationally. She's also Professor Emerita at Transnational Studies at the University of Sydney. And among her publications are September the 11th, 2001, Feminist Perspectives, which was co-edited with Susan Hawthorne, published by Spinifex Press in 2002. Hijab and the Republic, Uncovering the French Headscarf Debate in 2008, and Women, Insecurity and Violence in a Post 9/11 World in 2017, both of those with Syracuse University Press. Her most recent book is The Political Economy of Same-Sex Marriage, A Feminist Critique, published by Routledge. And she'll be doing the honours this evening. So over to you, Bronwyn.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Can everyone hear me? Yes? All right. So I'm speaking to you from Sydney, where we have a heat wave, the almost diametrical opposite of a snowstorm. And I'm on Gadigal and Wongal land. I sometimes wonder if at some point in the future, which many of us will no doubt be dead and gone by then, people will look back on this time as the age of absurdity. Our understanding of history is marked by various descriptors of dark and light times, even though some of the supposedly light times were often among the cruelest to women, Renaissance, Enlightenment, and so on, which is not to discount the otherwise valuable ideas that may have emerged at these times. It is simply a reflection on how they were often deployed to exclude, persecute, and indeed kill women, even those very women who embraced their logic to argue for women's rights. However, I believe that we are now in one of the dark, dark times for women, and indeed not just for women, but women are my concern, not only because I belong to the class of women, but also because women are both disproportionately affected by catastrophes of various kinds and disproportionately targeted by the punitive politics of masculinist regimes, which is, well, all of them really. So why do I say the age of absurdity? Certainly many, even most views about women held by ruling classes in both the supposedly dark and supposedly light ages in the past have merited that the adjective absurd be attached to them, even as their consequences for women were lethal. But it seems in these first decades of the third millennium, we have reached the summit of Mount Ridiculous. At the summit of this perilous mountain, with its crevices and precipices that have proven so particularly and specifically lethal for women, is the ideology of gender identity, which now has an increasing reach throughout the world, as we all know. This ideology surpasses in absurdity even such beliefs that the earth is flat, that nasty beasties maraud unknown lands outside Europe, and that women healers, intellectuals, artists, and so on are evil witches and should be burned. Because the absurdity of today demonizes women in the very name of equality, inclusion, and even feminism, as well as calling us evil witches who should be burned, not to mention calling men women, which is sort of like saying the earth is flat, really. It is this poisonous absurdity that Kajsa Ekman analyzes in her latest book on the meaning of sex, thoughts about the new definition of woman. Just published in, I believe, a slightly updated English translation by Spinifex Press, because there are some references to the original in Swedish. It's my great honor and great joy to launch this book, even if the topic is singularly depressing. Given how depressing the topic is, and how much damage the ideology and the practices it engenders, I use the word advisedly, have done to women and girls, it may perhaps strike you as curious. So I found myself laughing out loud several times while reading this book, for it is really very, very funny. Kajsa has braved the perils of Mount Ridiculous to expose the full-blown absurdity of its geological and genealogical construction, the layers of often self-contradictory pseudo-theories that laid down like so many sediments traversed over times by various volcanic incidents and other metamorphoses to produce the grab bag that we now know as the ideology of gender identity. So we have the gendered brain meets gender is in the eye of the beholder, meets gender is an individual feeling. Chapter 8 is titled, I particularly like chapter 8, is titled, Help, My Son Loves Pink. We have psychoanalysis meets post-structuralism, postmodernism, and queer theory, whereby gender becomes a sort of floating signifier, meets the return of the absolute. Gender, and I'm citing Kajsa here, gender emanates from within us, and only we ourselves can know its truth. List your pronouns and I will know who you are. End of quotation. Meets a hijacked and perverted rescripting of intersectionality, wherein, and I'm quoting again, suddenly the entire term bank of intersectionality is no longer valid when applied to sex, wherein oppressed groups have a right to define themselves unless they are women. Women should not even be allowed to discuss a definition of their own group, she writes. And of course, we have the one-sex theory, women are inferior versions of men, getting supplanted by two-sex theory, women are practically a separate species, then getting supplanted anew by one-sex theory 2.0, where sex is immaterial and gender is all. All 73 of them, I'm told, apparently. I actually had a go at naming them all recently myself and gave up when I got to marshmallow snowflake gender. I now have a new respect for ice cream companies trying to dream up new names for their flavors. Yes, gender, 73 of them, is all. And your maleness or femaleness is determined not by your observable biological characteristics, but whether you like Barbie or G.I. Joe. The so-called gender identity scale dreamed up by Mermaids, which is the UK trans organization, as you would know. And Kajsa discusses this particular scale appropriately in the aforementioned chapter, Help, My Son Loves Pink. In that same chapter, she asks, with reference to a children's book available in US libraries and that refers to gender alignment or congruence between the brain and the body, she asks, in what way are ovaries congruent with pink glitter? I do not have time here to cite all such acerbic little gems because they really did make me laugh, or indeed to outline the multiple theoretical and political explorations, excavations, and explanations. Did you like that alliteration there? That informed this marvelous book. But let me try to give you an idea of why I love it. First, it is thoroughly researched. I often myself say that I do not criticize what I have not read or watched, which has meant I've had to read and watch some truly dreadful things in all senses of the word. And you'd be surprised, or perhaps not, at how often the contrary is true in academia and media, with straw women and straw men being constructed ad nauseum. Kajsa, for her part, has been rigorous in her research and meticulous in her analysis. She has indeed set herself the task of watching and reading some truly dreadful things. She pulls apart the tangled threads of gender identity theory and politics in such a way that both their absurdity and their deleterious and indeed lethal impacts on women and girls are clearly exposed. Second, it is highly accessible. The chapters are short and the explanations and analyses both interesting and clear. It is intellectually rigorous, but not hermetic. That, for me, is absolutely the best kind of intellectual production. Third, as I mentioned before, it is so funny. I could take up the rest of my time trotting out some more wee gems, but I would rather leave you to discover them for yourselves. Moreover, and quite importantly, the humor in the earlier chapters where the absurdity of the ideology is exposed also renders the discussion of political and material impacts on women and girls in the later chapters even more strikingly somber by contrast. Most of us here are familiar with those impacts, but Kajsa's discussion of them lends them new acuity, showing us just how lethal the absurd can be. Fourth is it is thorough not only in its research, but in the many aspects of the issue as they present in society, politics, economics, and law. Indeed, Kajsa's book is like a map to show us every pathway this ideology has taken, every way in which it has impacted on lives and systems, and indeed how pervasive it is and how clever the manipulations have been. Fifth, on reading this book, I learned a great deal more about the Swedish case. It is often difficult to find material on any topic of big interest to those of us who live and work in the Anglosphere that takes us outside the Anglosphere in any sort of in-depth way. We need more such books on what is happening in France, in Spain, in Argentina, in Brazil, in India, and so many other places. We need them not only because each nationally, linguistically, culturally, and geopolitically situated case needs to be understood to fully appreciate its resonance beyond that context, but also because we need to better understand how, and indeed why, the ideological patterns that are indeed global in reach and as such present some uniformity, nonetheless manifest in specific and ways and at specific times within local contexts. I have always been of the view that global and local should not be considered distinct or in opposition, nor should they be considered completely in unison. They exist in interaction, in dialogue, they influence each other and change in function of each other. We cannot understand one without the other. So I was very pleased to learn more about Sweden. We also cannot have theory without practice or practice, excuse me, or practice without theory. Without one, the other has no useful meaning in terms of formulating a vision for society. There have been times at which theory, usually that devised by men and reeking of sophistry as concerns women in particular, has been held up as superior to practice, or practice and experience have even been dismissed as irrelevant or unimportant in some way. But without theory, practice and experience are also limited and cannot constitute a political project. As Kajsa puts it, and I quote, "Climbing up a mountain range, one might deduce that the whole world is made up of mountains, unless one had the benefit of broader analysis." Unfortunately, the mountain range, with Mount Ridiculous as its forbidding peak, is now considered to be the whole world. I quote again, "Far from being dismissed as partiality, practice has witnessed an upsurge and is now considered a superior source of knowledge," unquote. Which one might think, and Kajsa might think also, have benefited women, we surmise. But as she points out, the supremacy of gender identity ideology has meant that for women, far from being able to articulate our experience, we are now erased from existence. Men still exist as a protected and indisputable category, women do not. So here we are, patriarchy 2.0 in the third millennium. And it is on this somber note, for all its entertaining wit, that Kajsa's book ends. She writes, quote, "Without the word woman, it is difficult for women's movement to exist. Without the word woman, it is difficult to think and talk about women's situation. Without the word woman, it is impossible to understand the oppression of women. Yet, removing the word woman does not rid us of women's oppression. We will just not be able to understand it or explain it, end of quote. Which, as Kajsa points to throughout this remarkable book, is precisely the intent of those neo-patriarchal rulers perched atop Mount Ridiculous, from which strategic vantage point they are able to fire lethal missiles at all who challenge them, all the while claiming they are the real victims in true Davos style. So that's something we all know, but Kajsa points to it with as I said, with remarkable acuity. So I'm very, very pleased to present this book to you. Some of you may have already read it. If you haven't, please do. It's a marvelous book. I have two questions for you, Kajsa. The first question is, I understand that there have been some slightly more positive developments in Sweden concerning, for example, the giving of puberty blockers to children. There's been a little bit of brakes put on that, or some caution urged. I think that started off at Karolinska, but I think that's had a wider reach now. I could be wrong, but it would be really good to have those updates. And the second question I have is, and I personally feel very pessimistic, and I think a lot of damage is going to have to be done to a lot of women and girls, and some boys indeed, before this turns around, before the political class either grows a spine or wakes up, one or the other or both. But I'm wondering what you think is going to help us turn this around. What, in this really dire situation, this very somber situation for women, as you very clearly point out, what might help trigger a change? The news from the UK is encouraging, but it clearly has not been enough, because in Australia we're in complete denial about it. So any pointers would be great. Over to you, and thank you for your book.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn. I hope everyone can hear me. Can you hear me and see me?
It's perfect.
Yes. So thank you so much, Bronwyn. Thank you for this great and honoring introduction. Thank you to Spinifex for publishing this book. I cannot overstate how important it is to have feminist editors in this time, and especially for topics like this, which a lot of other editors shy away from. And happy Women's Day, everyone. I see a lot of people I know here. I'm going to start by answering your questions and then go on to outlining a little bit about the book, which some people might not have read. A note on Sweden: some people might have been surprised by the fact that Sweden latched on to gender identity theory so fast. A lot of people abroad have this idea about Sweden as, being a pioneer when it comes to abolitionist laws on prostitution, equality between men and women, and so on. What one tends to forget is that Sweden is a very modernist country that always wants to be the first. So when gender identity theory came along, it was seen as modernizing legislation. And that was actually the term that was used by politicians. We have to make it up to date. The ideological implications weren't even discussed. It was just a matter of updating as if it were a computer program that had to be actualized. We were very early with using puberty blockers on children, and very young children, and very many of them. So I think that's one of the reasons why the consequences were also felt earlier here. And one of the main hospitals, Karolinska, actually stopped using puberty blockers and the Dutch protocol on children. And now also the national health institutions have issued new recommendations that we're not supposed to use the Dutch protocol or give hormones to children, except the ones that have already started treatment. What we don't know, however, is if these new recommendations are being followed or not by local hospitals, because we do know that the people working often in gender clinics are very much activists as well, and really believe in this, and might not take this seriously. So we're going to have to analyze what really happens. I wrote this book to analyze gender identity theory as a theory, because this is a very interesting theory that does not recognize itself as such. It makes astonishing statements about the nature of gender, sex, men, women, what we are allowed to say and think about ourselves, how we should speak about ourselves, how we should understand ourselves, what the laws should be, how we should practice sports, and all sorts of things. However, if one is to actually take those theoretical implications seriously, Instead, we are met with a total turnaround of 180 degrees. And we're told that this is just about trans people. This is only about, as I read in my book, a poor man who's, standing in front of the mirror, putting on a skirt and going, oh, poor me, all I want now is a pair of breasts. And if I try to take the theory seriously, they will tell me, are you against him? Are you against his existence? So this book is an attempt to actually try to understand the theory theoretically. And what I found when I did this, it took me 4 years to write this book. And I actually met with a lot of contradictions in the theory itself, which is very interesting because I don't think that actually the proponents of gender identity theory have sat down and thought about, how it actually all goes together. So I ended up trying to bust common myths, for example, that sex is not binary at all, that a lot of people are intersex, and that's why people transition, which when I studied it turned out to be that people who actually are intersex, first of all, intersex does not mean that one is neither man nor woman. Everybody has either a male or a female sex. Now, a lot of the people who are intersex have something called a DSD, but that doesn't mean that one is not man or woman. Now, these people are not the ones that transition and that become trans people. So these two things have no relationship. However, in the debate, these topics are often talked about as if they're one and the same thing. Another myth, gender is innate and is in the brain. This I also researched. There is no scientific foundation for this. Nobody has found gender identity anywhere. Or that men want to be in women's changing rooms because they're scared of other men. It's also another myth that's commonly propelled. Or that transition is simple, easy, and leads to happiness. I actually wanted to write this book, first of all, about women and about what the consequences that gender identity theory has upon women. But when I started researching, I met people who had transitioned, and I spent a long time with them, and I realized that they are suffering the consequences of this theory more than anyone in their own bodies, because they are told that this is going to lead to happiness. They come into this from often a history of internalized homophobia, mental health problems, history of abuse, and they are told that this is going to solve their problems. What they're not told is that it's going to lead to infertility. It's going to lead to a lot of problems because you cannot just press a button and change sex. It doesn't work that way. And often when people get into this cycle of hormones, they don't understand that this is going to be forever. They're going to be patients for the rest of their lives, and there's no turning back. So I expanded the reach of the book to also include the effects that gender identity theory has on people who transition. And maybe innocently, I thought that people are going to understand that now I'm on trans people's side here because I'm taking their plight seriously. I'm listening to them. The proponents of gender identity theory often claims to be allies of trans people, but haven't really listened to the fatal consequences of so-called gender reassignment surgery. And I thought, here I am really listening and really taking in the testimonies of trans people. However, this did not help. I have been called a transphobe and a TERF and whatnot and been canceled. I've lost 2 jobs, and life has, to put it mildly, not been the same since the publication of this book. What is interesting, I've noticed, to answer your question, Bronwyn, of what it would take to turn this whole thing around, is that I've noticed that most people actually agree. The same people who cancel me, prominent journalists and politicians and intellectuals, have privately sent me messages saying they do agree with me. They just don't dare to say it to anyone. And at times I couldn't help exposing those very different statements coming from sometimes the same person who's privately telling me I agree with you 100% and publicly calling me a TERF. So I think that's very interesting, and it tells us that the problem isn't that we need to convince people that men are not actually women. I mean, everyone knows this. The problem is courage. We lack courage. A lot of people don't just dare to say it. So I think the more people that come out and dare to speak their mind, I think it's going to come to a certain level where the tide will turn, and then a lot of other people will follow and just say that they've always thought this, they just didn't dare to say anything, which is a bit sad, because it makes you realize the kind of opportunist nature of a lot of people. So even though I'm positive that the tide will turn at some point in time, we will have lost our faith in humanity, to put it mildly. My book analyzes gender identity theory from three levels. The way I see it is that it operates on three levels. Most people just get to the first level. And on the first level, we're told that this is about tolerance, this is about diversity, this is about accepting everyone the way they are. Basically, we're told that this is something akin to homosexuality. This is the same thing. Like, if you like gay, you will like this. There's no difference. But the interesting thing is that the second level, and most people don't really connect the dots here. On the second level, we're told that gender is innate, but sex, biological sex, is something that you're assigned at birth. So this is basically like a total turnaround where one has replaced sex with gender, which means that we're told if you like pink, if you like to play with dolls, you are a girl. Your body doesn't matter, you are a girl. If you like to play with cars, if you don't mind getting dirty, you are a boy. And if your body happens to disagree, the body is wrong and the mind is right, and the body has to be changed. So instead of tolerance, we are back into a kind of extremely invasive and repressive idea about the role of men and women, about gender, and exactly as you were saying, Bronwyn, about you were either Barbie or G.I. Joe. So, okay, once we accept that, this kind of new postmodern biologism without a body, which is very interesting, the old type of biologism that we were taught in the 90s were about, if you are a girl, you must like pink. Now we're told, if you like pink, you must be a girl. So the behavior comes first, gender comes first, and sex comes second, whereas before it was the opposite. And after that, we say, okay, so I suppose there must be some kind of test to determine who is a girl and a boy, a brain test. No, it just turns out that there is no way of understanding this except asking the person him or herself, meaning that anybody who says they are a gender automatically will or should be treated in law and for all purposes as that gender. So then we get to the point where we have classic male crimes, such as downloading of child pornography, sexual abuse, rape, and things like that, which we know that 99% of the people who commit those crimes are male. Now we have cases, even here in Sweden, of males who then declare that after having committed those crimes that they are essentially female and should be transferred to a women's prison. Now, this doesn't go together with the previous layer of theory, because in the previous layer, we were told that if you liked pink and you liked girly stuff, you were a woman. Now, a man who rapes women, who downloads child pornography, who is enlisted in the military, to cite an actual case here, and who is an extreme right nationalist, would, judging by that theory, not be classified as female, because those aren't, even by stereotypes, this is not female in any way. Now, in every layer of the theory, the previous layer is forgotten. So now we're told, no, if he says he's a woman, he is a woman. It doesn't matter that he doesn't like pink at all, that he has nothing in common with the stereotypes of being female. He is a woman because he says so, and will be reported in the media as a woman downloaded the most amount of child pornography ever seen. And which led to here lots of men speculating in online forums, who is this exciting woman who's downloading all this amount of child pornography? Let's get to know her. Turns out it actually wasn't a woman at all. So in the end of this theory, we get to a very interesting point where who decides about gender and sex? Well, it is the man. The man decides. He decides what he is, and he decides what we are, and we cannot object. If he says he is a woman, he will be treated as a woman by everyone. And if he says that we are cis women, we will be treated as cis women everywhere, and we cannot object. And I want to also say something about the word cis, which I think is very a very type of, to use a modern language, gaslighting type of technique. Because woman as a word has been the tool of the feminist movement for the last 200 years. If one looks back in history, woman used to be a word belonging to patriarchy, you know, all these old classical texts where men were saying what a woman was, a woman is this, a woman is that, a woman is just a defect man, not a real person, has no soul, a woman is a man that just went wrong in creation, and so on and so forth. Women, the last 200 years, have taken that word back and started using it, started understanding woman as an oppressed class with the right to revolt. So now when patriarchy can no longer use that word as a tool, what happens? Well, patriarchy has decided to discard this word, woman. Woman is no longer useful for them. Because when we say woman, we understand the totality of women's oppression. We understand the violence against women, the lack of resources that women have, the lack of medical research about women's bodies, menstruation as taboo, religious oppression of women, all that we understand when we speak about women. Now, what is being done to the word woman is a metaphor for what's being done to women all over the world, which is fragmenting, cutting up, making it mean its exact opposite, and adding the prefix cis. Now, if I say I want to fight for women worldwide, that means something, it's powerful. If I say I want to fight for cis women worldwide, it doesn't quite have the same ring to it, does it? So if I would rename this day International Cis Women's Day, basically that would mean International Day of Millionaires, white privileged women worldwide, right? Because that's what cis woman actually has come to mean. Cis means privileged. So all of a sudden, we are renamed privileged people. And the most oppressed of all women, we're told, is the trans woman who happens to be born a male. Now, this thing that you can identify however you like is valid for all categories except trans women. I cannot identify as a trans woman. I cannot come out and say, I feel like a trans woman, so I am one. No, you have to be born a very physical and biological male to get access to that title, while the title woman seems to be open for everyone, which is another contradiction in this theory. So I am not one of the women who, after having been canceled, has gone to the right. I am still a feminist and a Marxist and a socialist. I based my book on feminism and dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism for me means that I see sex and gender as basically has a dialectical relationship akin to nature and culture. I'm aware that lately, the left and big parts of feminism worldwide has gone astray on this question, but I stay firm, anchored in my theory, and I'm actually positive. I don't think that this reign of gender identity theory is going to last forever. However, I do think that the effects of it have been terrible as it is speaking. Not just the canceling of women worldwide. Which I think is a topic on its own that even if some people don't agree with us theoretically, at least I would expect them to stand up when we're canceled, when we're threatened, when our livelihood is taken away from us. So yeah, I would just like to thank you for listening, and maybe some of you will have comments or questions.
Okay, acting as Susan again here. Does anyone have any questions about the book or the subjects this evening? Do you want to either put up your hand or just start talking?
Yeah, and please use the little hand in the
Yeah.
Zoom application. Don't put up your physical hand because we may not see you. There are too many of you.
Well, that's a lovely comment there. Admire you all. Very nice. Does anyone have a hand up? I can see one. Okay. But Simone, just need to unmute.
Hi, thanks so much. It's lovely to see you, Kajsa and Bronwyn. That was a lovely introduction too. Kajsa, I'm a sex trade survivor abolitionist in Australia, so I've followed your work really keenly for a long time, and I just wondered if you could speak to the relationship between the prostitution system and this. It's not really even a forced teaming with prostitution. It seems to go hand in hand, this gender ideology and the prostitution system. And I think we've all made the connection that it seems to be coming from similar lobbying. But I just thought maybe you could speak to that a bit with some authority, given your research. Thanks.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you. I'm so glad to see you here, and thanks for the great question. I think that connection especially was one of the reasons why I started getting into this, because around 2014 or so, proponents of prostitution all over the world started changing topic and started promoting gender identity theory. And I thought, can this be a coincidence? Why is it exactly the same people? It's always the same people. And the arguments in favor of prostitution started changing as well. Before it was prostitution is good for women. You know, we have to leave the system intact for the women. And now all of a sudden it was, we have to leave the system for trans women because trans women can't get other jobs. So for their sake, we need the whole prostitution system. And I was thinking, okay, so what is this? What is going on here? You know, and I've interviewed trans people in prostitution in Cuba and other places, and a lot of them didn't want to be in prostitution no more than anybody else did. So I found that this was basically a fake argument. What I did find, however, is that it was an argument that kind of made people not really be able to contest the sex industry, because every time you hear the word trans, you think, oh, okay, I don't understand this. I don't know anything about it, and I can't say anything about it. So it was a very efficient argument. I also think the transition industry, the sex reassignment industry, has a lot of things in common with prostitution, especially when it comes to the mind-body split. The mind-body split that one is forced to perform in prostitution, as in, I am not here, it's not me doing this, trying to think of something else, trying to numb yourself with drugs and alcohol, trying not to feel, trying not to be present in the body, is very similar to what happens when the gender identity industry is telling young girls that you are actually not this body. This teenage female body that you have, that is being looked at, that is being exploited in the media and online, is not really yours. You are just your mind. You are actually a man. You can be all this. You just tell us, just say the word and we'll convert you into a whole man. You know, what they don't tell you is they can't create a functioning penis. So you'll only be a man like waist up. You won't really be a man. So you will still have the same sex organ as you had before, except you probably won't be able to have children. So, but what I find is the same mind-body split is active here, and what I think is so typical. You know, patriarchy doesn't fail. And I tell that to all these young girls who think they can cheat patriarchy, all these young girls who go on OnlyFans and think, I'll be smart, you know, I'll just use these guys. Like, I'll sit in my room and make lots of money. You can't win over patriarchy on its own terms. Like, from prostitution, the one that comes out winning is not you. It's going to be him. And the same thing about the gender identity industry, like who gets maimed in this industry is young girls and gay men, because young girls and gay men are going to do the full package. They're going to go like do all the operations. Whereas the older heterosexual males who get into this, they are not going to cut their penis off. Like they might take some hormones, they might change their hair, but you know, they're going to leave their body intact. So what do we have again? We have homosexuals and women on the losing end again. So people who think this theory is some kind of new magic wand that's going to like make gender and by that, you know, gender inequality disappear. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. It's just the old inequalities coming back again.
Thank you. I think that was beautifully summed up.
Thank you, Simone.
And there's a couple of questions in the chat there. Could you talk a bit about your chapter on invisible trans men?
Yes, yeah, that chapter I think was one of the most painful to write, and also illuminating for me, because I realized that all the headlines about trans person making it into a parliament somewhere or as a politician anywhere during one whole year was about trans women. So there was no trans man making headlines for entering politics at all. And I also realized that most of the things written on trans people is written on trans women, meaning men, and nobody actually cares about the women who transition. Nobody actually cares about trans men. Trans men make headlines when they get pregnant or when they have their period, which is a very typical female role. Trans men are even more invisible than women usually are. But they don't have the tool that women usually have, which is feminism, because they are men, so they're even called privileged within the community, meaning that they're double invisibilized, because they're invisibilized within the trans community, they're invisibilized within the world, they're invisibilized within feminism, which they might have personally decided to opt out of because they are not women, and their whole idea is they're not going to be women. So their plight is really difficult. I'm always struck by this discrepancy when it comes to the debate about, for example, prisons. You know, when we talk about prisons, when we talk about changing rooms, and we're talking about spaces, sex segregated spaces, we're always talking about the right of men to enter female spaces. We are not talking about the right of females to enter male spaces. Has there been any woman applying to get into a male prison? I have not found a single one. I have not even found a single book, a single article about trans men in male prisons, right? The only article I managed to find was a dissertation, if I'm not wrong, or a thesis that was about why there is nothing written about trans men in prisons. You know, nobody's talking about how trans men lacking a penis are going to go and pee in men's bathrooms, for example. Where would they pee? How would they pee? And I think, you know, the way that they're ignored, yeah, it's like you're saying, Simone, in the comments, it's almost like they're women. I mean, they are treated like women, but without access to the feminist movement. So, and I think it also shows the hypocrisy of the so-called trans movement, because if you know, it was really about caring about trans people, it would be about caring about trans men too. But essentially it has turned into a men's rights movement. So that's why we don't hear about trans men.
Okay, yes, can you hear me? Anna asks, yes, how can we help women find the courage to speak out sooner? And how do we break the stranglehold on the media?
Yeah, I think the UK is like a good example. In the UK, I mean, things are really moving forward. In the UK, there is a debate. It helps that they have J.K. Rowling in the UK, who has been such a pioneer in this. And I admire her so much because, you know, she had everything and she didn't have to speak out on this, and she had so much to lose, and yet she did it. Here, unfortunately, we don't have the same debate. I made a mistake with my book. What I think I should have done was prepare the ground. What I think I should have done was to have, before the publication of the book, gather a group of women who would go out and publicly defend it, and who would go out and support me, because the other side is extremely well prepared. I mean, they have, I just found out yesterday, they have researched everyone who I thank in my foreword in the Swedish version. Like, and I thank a lot of people. I mean, I thank friends who have nothing to do with this book just for being there. And they have researched every single person and targeted them. Like, are you somehow implicated in the creation of this book? So what I think I should have done was to amass a group of women who would just go out and support it. And I think it's a good strategy, like for every new post or for every new statement, have an army behind that will go out and defend it, so that they see that we're not alone. Because the thing is, when they attack us, they don't attack the movement, they attack women one by one, and they single you out and they attack you alone, so you feel alone. And I think that's their strategy. You speak out and all of a sudden you're alone, your friends are nowhere to be seen, and the other side is suddenly a big group of people. So I think, yeah, we need to also go together on this. And for every woman who's being attacked, you know, let them know that she's not alone. Even you might disagree with her on other issues, like, you know, just let them know, like, she's not alone. If you mess with her, you're going to mess with a lot of us.
Bronwyn, did you want to say something there?
Yeah, I wanted to just make a quick follow-up on the UK. They have JKR, but they also have an extremely active women's movement. There are women who've been organising, speaking. There's Women's Place UK. There are the video conferences. There is so much going on in the UK, and it comes from a very long, I hate the word tradition, but it comes from a long history of feminist activism, second wave and first wave. And there's a critical population mass in the UK that in a country like Sweden and Australia, we just don't have. In Australia, we also have the tyranny of distance, as it's called. We are a very, very, we're the size of the US with, you know, like a, like a tenth of the population. Yeah. So I think there are specifics in the UK that aren't just JKR. There is a grassroots feminist movement that has been extremely well organized. There's women in the Labour Party who've got together and issued a declaration. There are women, even if they don't always agree with each other, like, you know, there's a lot of controversy around Kelly J. Clean, who's about to arrive here. But there's, you know, there's like in Fidia, for example, whatever they think of KJK or other women, they don't actually badmouth women publicly. They just go ahead and do their feminist work, and they do their feminist work in quite a holistic way. So it's not just all about trans. They are feminists. They are feminists, like, you know, 24 hours a day around all issues in society. It's not just about trans. And so I think in the UK, there are other assets, if I can put it that way. You've also got some individuals such as Kira Bell, such as Maya Forstater, such as Alison Bailey, and so on, who've actually had the courage, Suzanne Moore and a whole bunch of other women who've had the courage to blog, to take court action, to go public in a, you know, and do it on their own, but with the support of a grassroots movement around them. So I think there are sort of critical mass and timing issues that are quite crucial in the UK, and women have been building to for a long time. In Australia, I think we have a serious problem. I think that problem occurs elsewhere, and you would be familiar with that, Kajsa, also, you know, because you have the Sweden Democrats and other, you know, sort of right-wing organizations and far right-wing organizations there, that the right has appropriated this issue and sort of run off with it like, you know, football. And it's become very divisive in Australia. We had the political football issue last year with the candidature of, you know, a woman for the right wing, the major right wing party here, and that caused a lot of division in the movement. And then the rest of it get labeled bigots. I agree with you, Kajsa, that we can't let a woman stand alone to be vilified. And a lot of us, even if we didn't agree with that woman, came out in support of her against the vilification she received. But it's actually become a really, really tough issue here in Australia with the right-left polarization, because the left are cowards. And I agree with you, Kajsa, that it's about courage, because the left want to appear progressive and so on, because that's the ideology that has sort of captured the left. And so no one has the courage to speak out, even if they secretly agree with us. And I think our Prime Minister secretly agrees with us, but he won't stand up for it because it's going to get in the way of all the other stuff they want to do. So I think the UK is a groundbreaking case, and it's possibly a sort of ground zero site for the rest of us to be able to do things off and to cite as an example of how we can turn this around. But I don't think we're at that place in Australia, and I don't think we're at that place in Sweden, and it's not just because of JKR. And I really admire her too. I think she's an extremely courageous and articulate woman.
We have a question, I believe, from Donovan. Hello, Donovan. I don't know what time it is there, but welcome.
Oh, yeah.
We love seeing you on these.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you, Kajsa. It's wonderful. I'm so thrilled about your book. It made me think very much about the parallels we see between the critique of prostitution and surrogacy and how we look at transgenderism as well. But one thing I thought was so significant that you mentioned was so Sweden seeing the effects of using puberty blockers on children, and the impact and in terms of health and the effects on young people especially. And we've seen that with Finland as well. So the developments changing in Finland. But like you say, so many of the gender clinics are occupied by activists. When it comes to the US, I'm in Alabama. I gave a testimony for South Dakota trying to do a bill or a law limiting transition for minors. And the activists are so well organized on getting all of these health professionals in, and they come in and they say, oh, well, of course, we know that these treatments they're so good for children and we have to do it for the children. And like you say, it's such a well organized and like tactical way of attacking these groups, especially feminist groups. So I wanted to ask too, from Sweden, have you noticed an increase in detransitioners among those who are speaking out, and has that impacted the way that the country has responded to transgenderism?
Yeah, thank you, Donovan, for the question. And it's great to see you and all your books as well. I'm like trying to figure out what's behind there. Yeah, well, we've had a couple of public detransitioners. I think we've had one that's, with outspoken with her face and name and everything, and it took a long time for her to dare to do this because they're being attacked by their movement. And I think it's very interesting that the ones who are brave enough to detransition publicly are often the ones that were very vocal in favor of the transgender movement before. So it's the same people that have gone around in schools and lectured about what is gender dysphoria and what it is to be trans, and all of a sudden they just realize, no, this was not the right thing for me, and then turn around and start speaking out again. So, which of course is really bad. It looks really bad for the movement, for their movements, because all of a sudden you have people just jumping off and speaking out about the tactics of the movement as well. However, yeah, they're often invisible in the debate, unfortunately. What's really interesting in Sweden is I write that in my book, we have one clinic, a gender clinic, that actually performs these operations, but that have opened a trauma unit for detransitioners who regret their transition and who are being treated at the same hospital for the very same treatment that they were getting at that hospital. And I think, that just tells you something. Like, I don't know what type of medical care in the world would have a trauma unit to treat trauma from that treatment while still continuing to do the treatment.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, Pauline, do you want to do the wrap up?
Yes,
you can be Renata, or I'm being Susan. You can be Renata. Very big shoes to fill.
I wouldn't dare try and imitate, but I just wanted to say, Kajsa, it is so wonderful to hear you talk. Like, it is just the most wonderful thing to hear you talk. And for people who have enjoyed her talking, like, buy the book, because it's like her talking. It's like every chapter is a diamond, and the end of the book is like a diamond necklace. Really, that's what the book is. But you've talked tonight about courage. And so maybe in the thank yous, we can thank the people who have shown courage. Okay, so first of all, Kajsa, it's you for writing this book and putting your name to it. And, and second, we have to thank Susan and Renata, who have put their names on it as publishers and have, took on the task of publishing this book, which is absolutely a fantastic book. So, courage can start with us, and, Spinifex has done its courageous step, and let's all hope that we can find the courage, like Kajsa, like Susan, like Renata, to stand up for what is right here. And I think the 3 levels that you outlined tonight, Kajsa, was really helpful and sort of encapsulates the holes in the theory that need to be pointed out. So I think that was a very useful tool. So also in terms of thanks, of course, we have to thank the wonderful Rachel, who has keeping us on track with all the technology, the marketing and the promotions. We could not survive without her. Also our office manager, Danielle, our previous office manager, Marilyn, our warehouse manager, Sharon, our typesetter, Helen. And I'd also like to thank and make a special mention of Christina. I mean, Kajsa, you talk like English is your first language. You are so brilliant, but we did also have a fantastic assistant translating from the Swedish to English, and that was Christina, and she couldn't be here tonight, but I'd like to acknowledge all the work that she's done on this book. And also in terms of courage, those people who were prepared to blurb the book and write an endorsement that's printed inside the book. So I think we've got the message tonight that we need to apply intellectual rigour to these theories, and we need to show the courage to stand up and know what's coming our way when we do, but know that it's worth it in the end. So thank you for inspiring us to show some courage tonight, Kajsa. And I'd also like to thank everyone who's come along tonight. It's really not the same without Susan and Renata, but I'm sure they'll be along for the next one and they'll really enjoy seeing this on YouTube. So maybe a small step of courage is to buy a copy of the book and give it to someone you know, or encourage them to buy it as well. But thank you all for coming tonight.
That's usually my sort of call from Susan to share my screen to how you can buy the book. My PowerPoint's just playing up a little bit. I'll try one more time.
If you go to the Spinifex Press website, www.spinifexpress.com.au, that's the starting point.
That's very true. Thank you very much, Pauline. Can you actually see my screen? And here's for overseas. You know, ask for it at your bookshop, ask for it at your library, order it from your preferred online bookseller, order it from our website. You can get the print and the ebook from our website. If you're in North America, ipgbook.com. If you're in the UK and Europe, you can go to gazellebookservices.co.uk. If you're in Australia, please use free post code at our checkout. You just put in free post when you check out on our website, and it will do free shipping, but only in Australia. Shipping is quite an expensive cost, particularly to small presses. So do support the book. Thank you everyone for attending this evening. Hopefully I'll have this on YouTube in a day or two, and you can watch it again then. I'll make a few edits maybe at the end where I couldn't get my PowerPoint.
And of course, Bronwyn, I forgot to thank you. So of course, warm thanks for launching the book and being a fabulous launcher of the book. So, you know, thank you so much for doing that, because that's also courageous too. So thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for everyone that's left comments and messages there as well. Have a good evening and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. Happy
Bye.
Wednesday. Bye.